It's off. Hello, 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 hello. Hi. So I'm Aron Pilhofer. I'm a Temple University professor by day. I do a lot of other things on the side. My main project right now is an organization called the Tiny News Collective, which Gina is involved with as well. We may talk about that today. And I'm very pleased to be here moderating this panel. Let me introduce all of the folks. To my immediate left is Shazna and Nessa from the Wall Street Journal. You're managing editor and in charge of visuals. Before that at the Associated Press. We've known each other forever and a day. You were at the Knight Foundation for a period of time. And you've definitely been in the innovation space for a very, very long time. So thank you for being here. To Shazna's left is Tomas Bella. I want to make sure I get this right. You're web director at Dennik. How'd I do? Is that close? Close enough? Okay. In Slovakia. You all might not be super familiar with Tomas's organization, but it's fascinating, and we're definitely going to hear more. It's a startup. He's co-founder. It's about 130 journalists working in Slovakia, where else? In the Czech Republic and Hungary currently. And finally, Gina Chua at the very end there. Is executive editor at Semafor, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's a new startup launching soon. Prior to that, Gina was at Reuters for many years, and also is a board member on the Tiny News Collective. So thank you all for being here.
I just want to say that Aron and I had lunch and
no, don't do it.
So like
no, we did not have wine. That is a damn lie. That did not happen. Absolutely did not happen. I want to start by talking. This panel is very generic, sort of innovation-y title. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, and I definitely want to leave some time at the end for questions, and I'm hoping this can be as much a conversation as anything else. So I want to start with this question of what is journalism in the future. In the States, you're seeing a lot of some startups that are starting to gain traction, City Bureau, Outlier Media, Spaceship Media, taking a very different, very collaborative, community-oriented approach to journalism. What they produce in many cases doesn't look like traditional journalism the way we would think about it. Do we see this as a trend? Do we see this as a model? Do we see this happening globally? So I'm curious who wants to start with that one.
I'm just so accustomed to it now. It feels like really normal to me. I don't know why we would not consider it traditional journalism other than it's all online and everyone is very savvy about how their audiences, what their audiences need. And I think that's probably one of the main things on my mind in this conversation is really how we think about our audience now. And I think, too, what we're seeing is a lot of funding that's happening to local news organizations. When I worked at the Knight Foundation, a lot of my work was based on innovation, but just on the tail end of my time there, and when I was leaving, I think there was a lot more realization about the urgency of supporting organizations that aren't necessarily the AP where I used to work, or the Wall Street Journal, or Reuters, or these other places, but that there are these audiences that just need this fundamental access to make decisions, especially in a time when the world is so our society is so polarized, and level of trust is plummeting in society, and if you look at voting levels, they're also plummeting. So I feel very enthusiastic and optimistic about some of these orgs.
So Gina, you're in a particularly interesting position. You're building something from scratch.
I'm not talking about Semafor.
You have to talk about Semafor.
At some point. Look, I mean, so there's just.
I think you also need to turn on your mic.
I did. It's just not. Is it working?
Try this one.
It's on. Hello, testing. Yes. No. Maybe. No.
Maybe it's just very low.
Testing.
There you go.
Okay, there you go. Don't have to use the deep voice, which I don't like. Okay. No, look, I just want to sort of just throw out a couple of bombs just to start, right? Which is, I do think we have to reinvent the story form. We have not really touched the story form in a long time, and we can and we should. The story form was invented because of telegraphs, really, and then got reinvented, I like to think, by the Wall Street Journal into the sort of the anecdotal lead, which is now desperately overused by everybody. And I do think with technology, with digital, I think we can and should rethink story forms. And then I think we can and should rethink the marriage of technology and humans, so that we're not just trying to use technology to replicate what humans can do, and really talk about that together. But most importantly, and this does speak to the Tiny News Collective, which I always give a shout out to, is we really have to rethink what news is and who news is for. And we keep, all of us who are in legacy media, including, frankly, at Semafor, where I'm also part of legacy, we all have an idea of what news is. And I bet we could get a whole bunch of people together and we could say, is this a story or is this not a story? And like 90% of the people would say, yes, this is a story, and no, that's not a story. And I think we have to rethink that, because it's clear that the people who make decisions about what a story is and what a story isn't come from a very particular demographic, and that the people we're trying to serve aren't always in that demographic. In fact, often are not in that demographic. And I think we really have to think about what is news to them, not what is news to us. Okay, well, that's it for the wine talking. I'm done.
No, and I think that, oh, go ahead, yeah.
I did not have wine, but so, Gina, the three of us have worked there was a data journalism award that we worked on together, and we would, bringing judges together, and it was an amazing global, amazing global thing, and some of the, like Jackie was saying, what's next? And in my mind, I'm like, it's the same stuff, data is even more important. It's even more intense, the amount of data we have and our ability to grapple with that data. Story forms, of course, visual storytelling is part of my world, but when I think of visual storytelling, it's a lot more holistic. It's not just about what I'm seeing, it's how I'm experiencing something. And when I think a lot about data journalism, I know there's a lot of folks who work in investigative world as well, and sort of the early days of car reporting, and but now this idea that we got to find the story in the data as opposed to using the data to back up what we already know. Lookup tools is sometimes very controversial in newsrooms because it's not a story, it's a tool. Or who has, and I think this is true, the tension between who has time to find their own stuff in that data versus just give people the data. And I think there are some solutions to that, but that's one of the big things on my mind is data, its product, and how professionalized it's become, almost to the point that it's broken away from the thing it's trying to serve, which is journalism, and how do we address that going forward?
And that's interesting that you say that, because the Wall Street Journal actually brought the product team into the newsroom many years ago, which is, so put a pin in that. I want to come back to that. So Tomas, your Dennik is a very interesting organization in many respects. Mainly, it is run by journalists and software developers, pretty much, right? You don't have a traditional marketing team. Do you have a marketing team at all? So journalists are so talk a little bit about the business model, how it works, because I think this is actually, although maybe the journalism itself looks traditional, your organization absolutely is not.
Yeah, so very briefly, we were launched 8 years ago when in Slovakia, as it happens in most of the countries in Central Europe, our publisher was bought by oligarchs, so half of the newsroom said we are not going to work for this guy, we will establish our own paper, what could be easier. So, and we even established like a print paper, and in a way, like to continue the debate about innovation, like our one discovery was that just knowing what kind of innovations to get rid of, like what kind of the chaos that was here for past 20 years was the big part of the concept. So we focused just on the basically focused on covering the news. We didn't have sports, we didn't have lifestyle, just covering the hard news, the most investigative pieces, the long form, and so on. So, for example, one of the first things we discovered, and we focused on reader revenue, so like 70% of the revenue is from subscriptions. And one thing we discovered is that we were hearing for 20 years, young people don't read, you want to have like TikTok style things, and you want to have short pieces and so on. And we are constantly, by getting feedback of what people actually want to pay for, we discovered they want long pieces, you know, and there is a very strange graph, like for every single one of those first 7 years, our articles were getting on average longer and longer, and now our average article is twice longer than it was 7 years ago. And it's not that we told reporters, please write longer articles. It's always, editor's job is always to cut it down as much as possible. But it's because reporters were getting feedback of, if you actually spend more time on one article instead of writing two, it will be rewarded with actually attention, and it will be rewarded with actually subscriptions. You know, so in a way, innovation for us is that, like, starting on the green field, of course, it's absolutely horrifying, and it's like everyone took like a 1/3 salary cut, and we didn't know if we are going to survive and so on. But in a way, it's liberating, because you can say, okay, we only know how to do one thing. We only had journalists. We didn't have any salespeople. One journalist had to become the CEO. I was a journalist. I had to become some kind of head of developers or something like that. You know, so like there was no one else. So we said, okay, we don't have any other expertise. We are not going to pretend we have expertise in marketing, so we are just going to write like as good articles as possible, and we will see how that works. And it actually works pretty well. So now we have second paper in Czech Republic, and company is profitable since the third year. So.
And you also are selling software, is that right?
Yeah, and we also took an approach of, like, we said, okay, we only can do one thing, journalism, and second thing has to be the software development, because we are absolutely dependent on selling the subscriptions. And we also made a decision of, we made all the software open source. So it's a funny situation, because all our competitors in our country are using our software, you know, so any innovation we make on Monday, they see it in the releases on Tuesday, like, okay, this is the new thing they are doing. But it also works very well, because we are getting a lot of feedback from other publishers who are using it, you know, so we are kind of sharing the knowledge. And I think a lot of the people understood that we are actually not in this fight. We are not fighting together for this one subscriber, like either he will subscribe to us, to them. We are fighting together for the huge majority of population which never subscribed before. And even if our competitor will persuade them for the first time to subscribe, I know that suddenly my chances jumped 10 times. My chance is that he will subscribe to me. So then it's a fair fight between who has a better content, right? So even like the sharing the software platform actually makes sense, and we still keep continue developing, and we are paying for it, and everyone else is using it for free, and it's actually a very good model for us as well.
Yeah, so actually you're touching on something that I think is definitely a thing, which is journalism has a plumbing problem, right? There is universally, the software that we run our institutions on is pretty terrible, and often not fit for purpose, and often fit for a very different business model than we are evolving into. So I'm actually curious, Gina, I am going to ask you about Semafor. You're not going to get away with not mentioning Semafor here. How are you thinking through this question from scratch?
Of software and CMSs?
And infrastructure, and tying it to your business model.
Well, let me talk about CMS, and I'll just say the first thing I said when I met Ben Smith and sort of walked through all the things I want to do, and the first thing he said was, yeah, but we're not building a CMF. So, you know, what else have you got? So we moved on and talked about other things. But I will say that the CMS that we have taken on and we're using is something called Sanity, and it's great, other than the name. It's great because the architecture of it is really different from what you see in most other CMSs. Most CMSs will have a, you know, headline, byline, dateline, text, right? And it seems to me sort of a complete waste of how you do things. And Sanity is basically just block-based. And so you can have as many boxes as you want. So you can have exactly that structure if you want. But if you want your story to be broken into 5 different blocks, each block has a different signifier, right? It's like thesis, counter thesis, whatever it is that you want to think about, it can do that. And that opens up all sorts of architectural possibilities down the road to how you might use that content, reformulate it, rethink about where the blocks go. We're not going that far. We are going to use more than one block for text. We're going to use 3 or 4 blocks for text, which is based around some ideas around how story forms could change at the margins and how you might think about that in the future. So I don't want to, I mean, I've made mistakes, made plenty of mistakes in the past about trying to blow up everything in one go. So I'm just trying to blow up bits and pieces. But that's not really the answer you want. But what it is there's an opportunity when you start from scratch to kind of rethink everything. And it is both incredible. I mean, the best thing about being at a startup is everything is possible. And the worst thing about being at a startup is everything is possible. And so trying to make decisions that don't lock you in while preserving some flexibility is great. But then, you know, if you gave me 5 years to get a startup together, like, I'd have a wonderful system, but I got months. And so this is just the, you know, let's make as few bad decisions as possible until we launch, then try and unpick as many of those as possible.
And so what you're really talking about is a product decision, right? Product
Correct, yes.
Problem solving with a purpose, right?
And no, and one of the key issues with legacy media, and I've, you know, every news organization I've worked at, except for one, has been more than 100 years old. And what you're doing often is you have a product, you have an audience, you have a product, you have a thesis about what people want, and even though the world has changed, you are locked into it, and almost every hard-coded choice you make, every technology you have, has to be backwards compatible with that. And that's frankly one of the biggest issues that legacy, I mean, Shazna, I happily talk to you about this forever, right? Which is like all of those decisions lock you into a limited path of innovation going forward. And again, we have an opportunity to make one set of mistakes now and try and correct it 20 years from now, but at least we get to make new mistakes today.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally the approach here is other folks make the bottle, journalists fill it. And what I'm hearing is that model has to change. Now, I was really curious to hear you, Shazna, talk about how product is too disconnected from the newsroom. Can you talk a little bit about that, in particular with the journal?
Well, I mean, I think I'd rather like just talk about it generally, the journalist side. And you're right, yeah, the journal did bring. When I joined the journal 5 years ago, it, you know, brought a CTO into somebody you worked with in the past, and then there was a vibrancy. There was, you know, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter even whatever that means. Product is in the newsroom. What matters is that there's a symbiosis between product and. Symbiosis between how technology is built, how systems are built, what your culture is that you want to build, and the journalism. You know, we're not selling toothpaste. Why do our websites look like, you know, Colgate? You know? So look at where our readers are. I mean, depending who your readers are and who your, you know, what the audience is you're trying to reach. But I'm very interested in a broad audience. I'm really interested in bringing complex understanding of financial news to a younger audience, not even younger, just broad. Where are those people? And if you look at the design patterns of where lots of eyeballs are, they are visual formats. You know, they're locked in their own way. They have their own constraints. But to Gina's point, you know, our tools and our choices have a bias toward text, always. Always. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. It just depends what you're trying to do.
And a particular kind of text, the 1,200-word inverted pyramids. Yeah.
Right. And so I love words, but we have to break that because that's not how we look at information. I mean, look at, like, our screens are this big. So.
If I can just add about innovation. So one important point is that we should also know what are the areas where we should not innovate. So, for example, there are now, I think, tens of thousands of CMS systems in the world, and I have seen so many times, like even when we were starting, like we were lucky, we were not smart, we were just lucky that we didn't have time, like suddenly we were all unemployed and we need the system in 2 weeks. So of course we will take WordPress and then we will have to replace it with something which is better. 8 years later, we have no reason to replace it with anything. With millions of users, there is no reason to replace it. We have a lot of customization and so on. And we were just lucky because we didn't have time. But normally we would be thinking, oh, of course we need our own CMS. Of course, if you are Wall Street Journal or New York Times, you probably need your own CMS, you know. But there are, like, in software development, they are much more careful about this, like, not invented here syndrome. And they know that this is a problem. Every software developer will tell you, yes, we have to do it ourselves because this, what is available is not so great. But they also know that they have to be careful about this, and usually someone already invented it, and usually it's probably better. And if you are a publisher, there is a 95% chance that someone already invented it before you, and you should just look around, even when your developers are telling you, no, we have to do it ourselves. You know, so in this way, it's easier to be a startup because you don't have time, and you cannot offer a lot of things, so you will just buy what's on the market, and it's actually very often it's so much more efficient.
Can I just? Does this work still? No? Doesn't? Okay, never mind. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, it's working.
Hello? Okay. So I just want to sort of try and reformulate a little bit of what we've said here, which is, I think too often journalists feel like they are in the content business. We are here to create information. We are here to expose wrongdoing, find facts, and that's a really important part of what we do. If we didn't do that, then we wouldn't be here at all. But that is not really what we are here to do. We are here, and you call it whatever you want, we are here to serve communities. We're here to serve audiences. And if all we think about is like we create information and someone will figure out how it goes to people, and product is somebody else's thing. It's like we make toothpaste, someone else will design the tube, and it's a better tube, and they love it, and this is great. That works for some businesses. I don't think it works for ours, because ours is so intricately, God, that's the wine, intricately bound up in what we create, how we create it, and how we reach people, and even that formulation is wrong, because it sounds like we're giving you something across the table. We're not. We need to engage with you. We need to build community. It's classic community building. And you can only do that if you own the whole supply chain. And I mean, I say this with some trepidation because, let's face it, journalists are not very good at a whole bunch of stuff, and so in many cases they should not be in charge of all this. But if the people who are in charge of this are not thinking through this entire soup to nuts supply chain, then I think we're failing. And I think that is a huge and important reorientation of what we do as a business.
So product can only change if culture changes as well. And our relationship with, generically, we often talk about the people we serve and the communities we cover and all of that. Those communities don't always feel that way about us. In Philadelphia, there are wide swaths of the city that has a great deal of animosity toward the Philadelphia Inquirer, and for very good reasons, because these are communities that haven't seen a journalist except when there's a shooting or a fire or some horrendous thing. They don't feel that relationship. It's not reciprocated. So going back actually to the first question, how do we can change the product all we want, but we also have to talk about the culture. How do we change the culture? How do we change it so that we are approaching the community as in a more humble way? How do we do that? Does that have to change?
This is a small example, but something the journal is doing a lot more of is spinning up spinning up conversations, and that shouldn't be that novel, but it is novel. Little Zoom discussions, what next for the Queen? Just spin these things up. Let's see the faces of the people who are telling these stories. Like whenever whenever I vote, I'm voting for we had 2 local elections in New York this summer. The best way for me to understand who I'm voting for is actually I'll look up videos. I want to see how they're talking, what the language is, what their body language is, right? And so I think that is one small step towards some of what you're talking about, Aron.
I say one small example from our side. So we have tried. Okay, we are a country of 5 million people, so the scale is completely different. But so for our local journalism means city of 40,000. And we tried to spread to regional journalism like 2 or 3 times. All those experiments failed, so we tried like 4th time. And the one thing that suddenly worked a bit is that we tried a project called like We Are Moving to Your City. So we said, okay, for 2 weeks we will. Restarting always works, no? So for 2 weeks we will move our newsroom to your city, your town, and we will stay there for 2 weeks, and we will do the meetings, we will only write about this. It was very interesting because, for example, first day we were there, we published the national newspaper with only the news about this city, you know, so even when we were from other side of the country, there was nothing else in the newspapers that you bought, only local news from this other city from the other side of the country, you know. And we did all kind of stuff. We did like cultural reporters went there, and sports reporter went there, and so on. And we rented offices and so on. And this was actually, and we did debates. It was very interesting. It was during the pandemics, which was very interesting time to make like a travel. But many times it was like the first time we forced some ministers to come to this city. You know, like the Ministry of Health for the first time visited the city because he had to come to the debate, and he had to come because we were inviting him, and he was, you know, and it was, and we were kind of hoping that, of course, the 2 weeks will not change a lot, but what changes is that you force the reporters to create like a local network of contacts that they will hopefully take back. And they will actually rely on those contacts, and then everyone in that city for many years will know who to call if there is a story and so on. You know, so this is not like a huge thing, but it's suddenly something that is at least not like obvious failure how to do the local reporting. And actually, it was like it was a great thing for the reporters. Like they really loved it because, of course, in the evening they will go to the pub and they will meet people there and so on. It was kind of like a half a vacation for them. Like I'm going to different part of the country, so it was very for them as well.
Gina.
Add 2 quick. I mean, this is fantastic. This is also. I remember Corrective opened up a local storefront newsroom, and this sounds way more ambitious and even better. But to the point, at the end, I was told, you know, people just came in to donate money to Corrective, which is great. But then the other example, which I want to talk about, which I think reflects the issue about news judgment, is Homicide Watch, right? And Homicide Watch. So classically, the Washington Post and all the other great newspapers in Washington would report on some subset of murders in D.C. There's about 100 to 150 people killed each year in DC. Well, probably gone up now, but at the time, and you know, and so the Post will report on what is a newsworthy murder. What's a newsworthy murder? It's blonde co-ed gets killed in, you know, bad part of town or whatever it is, and they wouldn't report on a huge amount. And Homicide Watch just turned the whole thing on its head by saying we will report on every murder in the city, and it was 1.5 people, like Laura and Chris Amico, and they did that, and they found. Apart from the fact that they have a very innovative story structure and data structure and all of that, which we can talk about for ages. But the point is, just doing that, they found huge communities that wanted, and so every murder wound up driving a small but significant amount of traffic to people. They're all the loved ones of those people who had essentially been ignored entirely by a fantastic and major newspaper in their, you know, in their locality. And so so just to say, it is a cultural change. What is news and what is newsworthy, I think, is a really important question that we have to keep asking ourselves.
And one of the big changes to the point about community, one of the huge changes that we've seen over the past 2 years is newsrooms that are almost, if not entirely, remote. Obviously, the pandemic has had, I think in some ways, actually a weirdly positive effect that we can run newsrooms in a non-traditional way. We all don't have to be huddled around a table, but you can live in in a community you actually are potentially covering. And so, Shazna, how has that impacted the journal? Has that had a material change, or have you seen other organizations where it has?
I think we've just been in this big, crazy old thing together. I'm not quite sure I've unpacked all of it yet, but I will say something I do think about a lot is, we did it. We did it. We covered an election from home. We covered January 6th from home, right? and more, and COVID, all of that stuff. Having said that, I do think there was a huge human strain. There was a huge strain on people, whether they realize it or not. I think, too, that there is a big difference. The thing I hear a lot is, well, I'm more productive at home. And I think there's a difference between personal productivity and team productivity. And in the kind of work I do, I need teams to be together and to have that interaction. So I think we're still trying to figure out how we manage that. So that's I don't have the answer. And I think every news organization is going to be different. Many news organizations have always been fully remote.
Right. I mean, the USA Today team is fully remote, and they do outstanding work. But I know what you mean is you miss a certain amount of.
Well, here's the other interesting thing too. You know, I hire a lot of new grads. I hire a lot of people who've never worked in journalism, but they are really civically minded, and I can train them to become journalists. I'm a big believer that we need a lot of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary skills in our newsroom.
Right.
I don't want somebody who thinks of themselves as an IT person. No, you're like looking at this data and you're going to find what is the rat in this data so that we can dive down into it. They're so intertwined, but that's how I learned, right? I didn't go to J school. I started my career in tech.
Right.
And then learned in the newsroom of the Associated Press during a very crazy election in 2000 where there were hanging chads and stuff like that, fuzzy math. But so anyway, what was been interesting is when I did go to the office in those early days, it was really the new people who were always there, and they were just so hungry to learn because they were new, and you learn that through osmosis.
Right. I do wonder if that's. I have a bunch of students who just got jobs in news organizations, and they're all remote, and I do wonder how that is going to affect them. They need mentorship, and it's really, really hard to mentor over Zoom, he says.
I think this is really contentious. People have very strong feelings about, I sometimes think it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction. It's like a reaction that someone's been told to do the opposite of what we've got used to, but I hope we can get to a point where having reasonable conversation about where things work and where things don't work.
And at the same time, like, the best reporters and the best journalists are probably right when they are saying I'm more effective at home. You know, like they saved 1 hour of time and they are actually spending it very effectively. So I agree that. But on the other hand, those young people who just started, they are missing not even mentorship. They are just missing hearing someone in the newsroom how he's shouting in the phone, which is probably a big part of the journalism education, right? Because the senior reporter is not there, and normally they would see him shouting on the phone and see, okay, how he's asking questions. You know, so I'm very worried about this. I have no idea how to solve this, but I'm very worried that like the whole generation that people who hired in last year or 2 years, they are coming to the office because they are desperate to learn, but on the other hand, we are not forcing the most senior people to go there because they can do whatever they want. They are senior and they know what they are doing, and those junior people are actually missing on that kind of very informal education.
Can all the senior people do what they want?
Let me just try and reframe this so I'm not known to be an optimist, but let me just try and reframe this in a positive light. It is really important to get culture into an organization. It's really important for people who have never been in a newsroom and starting out fresh to understand what that organization is. On the other hand, I think we all understand that the cultures that we have worked in, some parts have been really good and some parts have been not so good, and that in some ways this move to remote is a real chance to reboot culture. You're going to have to live with remote anyway. It's like half your staff are going to quit if you force them to come back to the office 5 days a week, right? And so the question is 2 days, 3 days, or never. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. But it does mean, because you have to create this new kind of online culture, now that you're past the rush of let's just get it done to now we can be intentional, I think there's a real opportunity to say, what do we want to create? What kind of collaborative culture, what kind of HR policies, but more than that, kind of what kind of news culture do we want to create? And I'm not sure I see a lot of people doing this because we're all busy and we've got too much to do, but it is a huge opportunity and we should seize it.
Yeah, and like you, Shazna, I hired a lot of people into the newsrooms of the New York Times who had never, it was the first time they've ever stepped in a newsroom, and some of these folks are coming from technical jobs, developer jobs, and they're wondering where the documentation is. Like, how does this room work? And, you know, and I have to explain to them that journalism is largely an oral tradition. It's taught kind of by doing, and that probably has to change, and that actually maybe is a good thing. I want to shift to, we touched on skills a little bit, but I want to touch on that specifically. We've seen who is a journalist has been an ever-changing, growing umbrella over the years. There are now folks in newsrooms, like I said, you know, I hired software developers, and they were not considered, you know, that was not a journalism job, you know, 20 years ago, obviously. It is now. A lot of the folks on your team, what are some of the skills that you're seeing now that are probably going to be necessary in the future? You know, you touched on AI, Gina, for example, and machine learning, and some of the.
So,
do you want to touch on?
So, like, there's not a general answer, right? I think there's going to be the person who, you know, walks the streets and has great sources and meets people in dark alleys, like, that's always going to be a skill. The person who's a great photographer, that's also always going to be. So we're always going to have people at the top end of any individual skill, and you don't expect them to take great photographs, shoot video, do a data analysis, and write 8,000 words, right? Okay, so let's get rid of all the unicorns. But I also think that much of journalism is moving to team-based organizations, and so you're going to have to sort of learn to build teams much more about, you're good at data and you're good at storytelling and you have good sources, and, you know, and you have to work as a team in stories. And you see the proliferation of multiple bylines is really a big thing, which is frankly a different problem for small newsrooms that can't afford to do that unless they want to publish one story every 3 months, which is, you know, a different problem. But I do think there's some fairly basic things that most people need to have. Journalists can no longer walk in and say, I don't do numbers. They have to do numbers. Numeracy has to be a basic part of all journalism education and just education in general. And then beyond that, I think there's really only, well, not to be a visual idiot would be really helpful too. So like everybody needs to have like some basic sense of visual skills. They have to be able to look at a photograph and say, that's a good photograph or that's a bad photograph. They don't have to take one, they just have to know what it is. And then I think it's critical that everybody needs some computational literacy. You have to know what a computer can do. You don't have to do it, you don't have to code, you don't have to, but you have to know what is possible so that you don't ask really stupid questions. But you can also ask, isn't it possible to do this? Because so much is going to be driven by what a computer can do for you. And if you don't know what it can do for you, you're always going to be, you know, it's like you don't know cars exist and you're like trying to figure out how to walk to JFK. Sorry, that was an inside joke, never mind. But you know, if you don't know things exist, then you know, you can't use them. And so you have to know that things exist.
I just want to add one thing on top of that, and it's okay, actually, if you don't know, ask. Like, I'm just shocked how people don't ask me anything. Ask me what I do. How does this work? How long is it going to take? Why can't you do it? I think there is also a bias in newsrooms that we're the ones chasing everybody all the time. You know, I want nothing more than people to ask me lots of questions. So I think it's okay to not to know, but just ask.
And obviously, like physical distance, like solves half of these problems. So we are lucky enough, like we have 100 people. So but when we were like rearranging newsroom, we still made sure that we have the software is in the middle of the newsroom, and so it's like domestic, then the software development, then the foreign news. You know, so they're right in the middle. Everyone can hear them what they are talking about, even when this is like a strange setting. Second thing, I think even like the new skills, has to come from like down up. You know, so we try to every year we ask on the year end like interview with editor-in-chief. We always ask like, would you like to do some other job than what you are doing now? Are there some things that are interesting and like, would you like to switch jobs. And of course, you need to have budget to do that. But sometimes people say, I was always wondering about data journalism, but I have no idea how to start with that. Or I have no idea what those guys are doing, but that's actually interesting. And then you have to take and sometimes even like take that person and go and I will introduce you to this other person, and please now sit down and talk about for 1 hour about what each of you are doing, and then you can understand, and then you can start learning that.
There's a skill that we really need is human resources in the newsroom. Career development, training, yeah, that's actually a really great
Can I
point.
just add one other thing, which is not a skill, but it's a sensitivity issue, which is,
Fabulous.
extra mic. How about that? No, this one seems to work. No, you get the good one. Is, I don't know, one bit of word, sort of cultural sensitivity.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues is that we are so, and this is not a bad thing per se, we're so dependent on the idea of representation in the newsroom, like let's make sure we hire more diverse and people, and that all is critical and important, but it is not enough, and we tend to lean on that. It's like, hey, I have a diverse newsroom, so it must be okay. It's not okay, right? And you've got to have people who know enough to ask the question, you know, is this okay? Have I asked the right questions? What are the biases that I brought that I haven't identified? And you need enough of a culture of people saying, I just want to check this with you, you know, to make sure that it's okay. The example I gave from a news organization that I will not name is, you know, that the story that ran that said, the lead that said China launched a rocket to the space station that, you know, carrying 5 astronauts, including 2 women. And as I said then, if you don't know what's wrong with the sentence, turn to the woman sitting next to you and ask her. She'll tell you.
Yeah.
One more thing on skills. Like, I just wanted to put a pin in the thought. It's obvious, I know, but it's worth talking about still. The tools aren't going to solve everything.
Right.
And what I have seen is some erosion in craft, especially when it comes to visual journalism.
I agree.
So now where am I going to find these people? I'm going to make them. I have to hire art school students who really care about democracy and then train them to become a journalist, you know?
There was this explosion of creativity, and I think it's really tailed off. I don't know why.
It's because you can use a tool and then you use the tool. Because you can use Tableau, it does not mean you're asking the right questions and formulating the best thing that can be told visually, for example.
I'm going to throw one more thing out there and then open to questions, as I'm sure there are tons out there, so prepare your questions. There is the startup movement here in the States is growing, it's vibrant, and it is changing the landscape pretty significantly, and particularly around media ownership. Communities of need are starting to launch organizations. This is what Tiny News is all about. There are organizations like Capital B, there are organizations like URL Media that are not just trying to change representation, but change media ownership for the better. And I think this is a trend that is going to hopefully grow. Is this something that we should also be looking for in the future?
Oh, come on. What a setup. Yes, of course. And the Tiny News Collective, which Aron created and chairs. Actually, you don't chair, but whatever. You created.
Are you guys going to tell us about what this is?
Yeah, we can.
No,
we can. So Tiny News is a nonprofit organization, and we are somewhere between we're like an incubator in a sense, but we help solopreneurs, so that's single founders, 1-2 people, launch organizations, news organizations. We provide all of the support necessary to do that, meaning we have a very basic publishing system, monetization, training. We give access to legal advice. We have a fundraiser on retainer to help raise money. That's what Tiny News is doing. There's a few organizations out there like that. IndieGraph in Canada. It's not just Tiny News, and it wasn't just me. There was a whole group of people who were.
Whatever. But you're underselling, right? Because the beauty of Tiny News is, and you know, it sounds very nerdy, and it is, but that Aron's a nerd, is that it drives down the cost of entry, and not just the money, but the difficulty of entering into becoming a publisher. And so it lowers that barrier dramatically. It helps that Tiny News also vets people who it takes on, because you have to identify a community that you're serving, you have to identify the need of that community and why it's underserved, and you should ideally be part of that community, which means you're democratizing ownership and startup. You get in, and the best part, I mean, not to say that there will be a failure rate, but of course there's always a failure rate. The best part is that the barrier to entry is so low, the cost is so low, that if you come in and you have 100 people and, you know, who knows, you know, half of them fail, you've opened up so much more. There's so many more communities that will be served by this, because you address the real root problem, which is it's hard to get started.
Yeah.
Get you started, doesn't work, doesn't matter, move on. But some people will succeed, and this is the thousand flowers blooming idea.
And the big missing component is investment and resources. That's the part we have to solve. Oh.
I just wanted to add to your original question about these small newsrooms springing up that are the ownership changing. And your fundamental question, what is journalism, right? I sort of like today, I try and frame journalism as a spectrum, and I don't think, you know, all journalism is not the same.
Right.
You know, what the journal, Wall Street Journal does is not the same as what the New York Times does. It's not the same as what solutions journalism is. It's not the same as advocacy journalism. You know, there's such a spectrum, and I think that's the only way I can grapple with that question. I don't think it's a monolith.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, questions? Yeah. I think we have all the mics. We'll repeat it. Yeah, just shout it. We'll repeat it. Oh, Coda Story. Love Coda Story.
Yeah, for this one. Thanks. Hi, my name is Natalia Antilova. I'm with Coda Story, and I have a question. Great panel. I have a question for both Shazna and Gina. Two separate questions and both follow-ups. Shazna, you said something that product has broken away from very early on. You said product has broken away from, you know, journalism that it's supposed to serve. Can you just expand on that?
Yeah,
And should I just put the question to Gina as well? You say that, you know, we need to rethink what news is. Can you tell us how you're doing it at Semafor and what news is for Semafor?
He's going to answer, or she's going to answer a Semafor question before we're done today.
I think
it's going to happen.
Not every organization is the same. Not every makeup of an organization is the same. But what I have noticed as a trend is that a lot in 20 years ago, we were product. We were the closest thing to product in a newsroom. We understood the news, we understood journalism, and we understood the technology, we understood the audience. Maybe we weren't as engaged in the revenue side, but I think there's been a big switch now where product teams are highly specialized, trained to be product owners, product managers, and they may never have worked in journalism. And so much is focused on revenue, so much is focused on like speed of software to the millisecond in order to save X number of it's all tied back to revenue. And there's nothing wrong with revenue. You know, business models and sustainable journalism is very important. But to Gina's earlier point, our industry is so intricately intertwined with the format. I think newsletters, for example, are a great example of that. We had to change our tone because we were sending things via email. You're not sending your same stories via email. You're sending a chatty note to somebody. You know, I see Dave Cohn over here, and he's got this text messaging, a really cool text messaging sort of service. You'll have to talk, do a better job than I just did. But the way we text one another is a very different tone. And so the product, the it's also combined. And I just hope that we can like get a bit more messy again. I think it's just become very clinical.
Okay, so look, I will not front run our launch. I do want everybody to sign up. Semafor.com, sign up, please. All the newsletters, we need you. I guess what I would say is that there's a couple of ideas, and I will not go into great detail. We're going to be newsletter first. We are rethinking the form of newsletters, and we're rethinking what it means and as a delivery system of information to people. And that's as far as I'll go. Other than that, we'll do that. We are really tied in product, and because we're a startup, we are creating product, and we're creating the content that goes with that product in a pretty seamless manner. Whether that is, whether all our theories and hypotheses are perfect, we'll see. But then again, we're a startup, so we'll iterate really quickly. And then I think there's a couple of broad ideas about talent, about transparency and story form, about multiple perspectives that we're trying to bake in that we believe address needs that audiences have asked for. And that's as far as I'll go. And then you can sign up. Sign up,
that's
okay?
fair.
Just sign up.
All right. There was a question up here. Yeah.
Check 1, 2, 3.
Oh my God, we have so many
Suddenly
mics.
all the microphones.
Wow.
Suddenly all the
Can we
microphones.
have more mics? Can I have 2?
Ansgar Graf from the media program Asia from KAS. Thank you to all in the panel. It was very interesting and exciting, but I'm still missing a little bit the answer on the question, what next for journalism? I didn't really get it. I haven't learned this. I got comfort by Thomas Beller's experience or experiences with his readers that they still like long stories. Gina kept me curious what Semafor will bring in and what it might change in the media landscape. I agree with Shazna that it shouldn't be only journalism students and graduates who are working in the media. But for example, some years ago, we were always discussing about AI, and Aron put this buzzword into the discussion, but there was not so much echo upon it. Do you guys think that AI, since in a lot of news magazines or news outlets we have AI writing weather forecasts or the reports about the soccer plays, not of the Premier League, but of the 5th or 6th league, also on, and therefore there were these debates. Could it threaten our jobs, our journalism? Could you have a little bit answer on that?
All right, let me just. If we believe that and it's like I don't mean this seriously because I do want to be employed. If we really sort of believe that our job is serving communities, then it shouldn't matter whether it takes away our jobs. If communities are better served, then communities are better served, then it's better that way, right? If we are horse carriage makers and we think cars will take away our jobs, then if people get around better with cars, then they get around better with cars, and we should go out of business. I'm sorry. But having said that, I just want to say I believe the discussion about AI in newsrooms has been fundamentally misplaced. It's been built around speed, which is important. It's been built around scale and cost, all of which are important. But it has not been built around insight, and that is the critical thing. Yeah. If you can build a machine intelligent, whatever the right word is, an AI-driven system that trawls information, that surfaces insights, that doesn't attempt to write it to the last story, because we understand that most of the time those stories are not particularly well written. But if you can use that to give insights and tips to reporters and have them follow up and stuff. And there are people who have built some systems. The Swiss system, I built one at Reuters. Bloomberg doubtlessly has one. If you can build those, you just have to think about what the possibilities are when you augment human intelligence with machine intelligence at speed and scale. We haven't done that, and one of the problems is other people are doing that. And if we want to stay relevant, if we want to have a public service mission, then we need these tools, and we need to invest in building the tools that work well.
So I will just quickly say that we have started AI project 5 years ago, and I have personally shut it down like 3 months ago. So it was like 5 years not wasted, but spent on something that doesn't have a future. I'm not saying that the AI doesn't have a future. We should still keep doing that, but we should basically, we have no answer to where is the role of AI or where is the role of any technology. The only thing we can do is that to make sure we are hiring smart people, and not only journalists, but also experts, software developers, AI people, whatever. We are listening to all people who are coming from outside to us with ideas, because a lot of them are coming saying, maybe your work of your journalist would be easier if you use this technology and so on. And most of those ideas will turn out to be like bad, you know, and some of them on the spot, and some of them after 5 years, like we just turned out. But basically, when we build, the only thing we can do is to build a culture that actually encourages the experimentation with that, to have enough money to do the experimentation. And then after maybe the 5th project we will do with AI, we will actually find out that, okay, this is the one that actually makes the job of journalists easier, or this is actually the one that replaces some terrible, boring part of the journalist's job, or this is actually the one that allows us to fire all journalists. I have no idea, and I don't have no idea how to actually find that out, only that to build a structure around encouraging the experimentation, and actually have business that allows the experimentation even when it doesn't make sense when you first hear the idea.
I think what's next in journalism was a trick title so that you would come to this session.
Yeah.
I think what we're saying, and I actually think it's so much more interesting that we have a plethora of thoughts, and we've already learned so much over the last 20 years, and these are still enduring questions. And I think certainly in the US there are a few new things, and maybe not beyond the US, but things like more nuance in voices, more diversity in our staff, so that we can tell stories to the communities by people from those communities. There are, lots of nuances like that, but I think it's all of those things. And I'm really interested that we didn't talk about VR, because wouldn't that be boring if somebody came up here and said the future of journalism is VR, for example? Because we've been talking about that nonstop, and it's sort of,
Mobile
fizzled.
journalism, AR.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go on and on. The litany of buzzwords.
But now that Facebook is doing it, let's never talk about it
Yeah,
again.
exactly.
No,
We have a
let's
question here.
pivot to video, damn it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is going to be the last one. If you.
Yeah, I can speak louder.
Okay.
I'm fine. Yeah, my question is, sometimes we look at our stories we publish, then they ask, what is the traction? What is the number of followers in your story? And when we look back into those stories or those followers, we see that some of them are not really relevant to the story that we are publishing, or add value to that story or to the traction. So, when we want to talk about this, how do we weed out those unnecessary followers and traction? Because most institutions normally ask, this is your website, but how many traction you have? Who are the followers? Oh, you don't have many followers. Some of those followers and the traction normally is not relevant to the story. So what do we do next?
Yeah, good question. You want to tackle that? How do you handle that?
I have a radical answer to that question, or something related. We don't care at all about the readership, for example. We don't care almost at all about. We definitely don't care about page views and stuff like that. We only care about subscription sales, And that sounds very, very scary at first. And I think there is a case to be made that you should never show any numbers to journalists. That we could discuss that. But if you are showing any numbers, then I think showing the subscription actually is much better for journalism than anything else. Because if you want a lot of clicks, if you want a lot of followers and so on, you can write about sex and you will get a lot of clicks, right? We all know that. But it's not so easy to cheat people with subscriptions, Like they actually want to see value if you want to have subscriptions, So I think actually the shift to subscriptions is the best thing that happened to journalism for many, many years. And I would say it's like the least damaging metrics you can have. And in our case, it actually leads to people writing longer articles, people spending more thing on one thing, really thinking like, okay, am I doing just the article as the same kind of stuff that everyone else did, just adding a few quotes, or am I actually creating something that has such a value that people will actually say, okay, I never wanted to pay for content, but now I will subscribe because this is something else. So thinking about the metrics is the one, what is the right metrics is the one way to approach that, I think.
You might look at how The Guardian has approached this. They've done a very, very good job of shifting from a scale model to a conversion-based model, along with all of the metrics that sort of feed into that. They've even managed to somehow reduce the amount of content they produce, which is incredible. I mean, that's a minor miracle that they managed to pull off. The Guardian, I think, is a really good example of a news organization that's made that shift to what's important.
And what fundamentally you said is it depends on the strategy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, no metrics are great, but I think obviously the thing you want is you want to know that you are serving your audience, and whatever proxy you have for that, you should do. And I will get in the last word. Semafor.com, please sign up for newsletters. I desperately
Second
need
to
them.
last word. I'm going to thank all of you for being here. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand this back to Jackie.